Alright, this is the tax problem. We were asked to write to calculate the income tax. So the income tax has some tax brackets. So if you're less than 25,000, you 15%. Between 25 and 75, then we're 25. And if a person earns more than 75, then there's a 35% rate. But there's also some exclusions to that. If you have dependents, then your overall taxes owed is reduced by 10%. And if a person earns less than 25,000 and they're disabled, then we don't want them paying taxes at all. And then they want to see at the end earnings, amount of tax before dependent deduction, amount of deduction, all this, right? So that's the first thing we're going to do is get all our output. All right, and they want to see the earnings, the initial tax, before deductions, and then the final tax. If we take a look at these, we can see that we're going to be calculating these three values. Earnings is something that someone has to tell us. Well, how much did you earn during the year? And we'll put that into our program. So that goes up into input. Okay, before we do anything else, we go ahead and get our low-hanging fruit, which is all these numbers up here. So for speed, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste them because I've already done them. All right, so these are just all the numbers, 25, 75, all the different rates, the zero, that if they're disability, and then the other deduction. So the next thing we want to do is come down here and figure out what these calculations are down here. Whoops. So we just put equal signs, and we start with the final calculation because that's always the easiest because it usually uses the ones before it. And we can see that this is the truth here. If we know that the initial tax is $1,000 and there's a $200 deduction, then the final tax is $800. So that means if we take the initial tax and subtract the deductions, then that will give us. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that from my secret file because it's faster, because other than that, this would be a 20-minute video. Okay, so our deduction then, our deductions are 10% of the initial tax. So it's initial tax times the 10%, which we put up here in the dependent deduction rate. So again, I'll go ahead and copy and paste that from my secret file. And that's how that's done. So the only thing that we have left is the initial tax. And the initial tax is simply what our earnings start with, and then the tax rate. But there's three tax rates, so we're going to have to use a generic tax rate place in memory for that. But we can go ahead and do the math. So we have earnings times the tax rate, and there we go. So this earnings here, and the tax rate's generic. We just created that. So actually, we know everything except what the tax rate is. But we also don't know one other thing, and that is deductions are not done every single time, so we really can't have it like this. The deductions are only done when a person has dependents. So we have to make that decision. So we'll go ahead and add that decision there, and we'll say that if dependents equals yes, then we'll go ahead and do this math. Other than that, we won't do it. So now we have to figure out where we're going to get dependents from, and of course if it's yes and no, we can't calculate that, so that's simply going to be an input. So I'll copy this, and that will be our second input. All right, we'll get space. Let me go ahead and move down a little bit. All right, and then we'll go up. So the thing we have to find out is our tax rate, and our tax rate is dependent upon the different cutoffs, 25,000 and 75,000. Well, I don't want to have it where I'm looking for less than 25 and then in between 25 and 75, because that's a complex decision. So we're going to say, is it less than 25? Is it greater than 75? And if it's neither of those, it's got to be in between. So I'll start with the 25 first. And we'll say that if the earnings are less than, and then we already have the 25,000 in a place in memory, so we'll go ahead and just copy and paste that. Then the tax rate, and of course we'll copy that, is going to be equal to, and that's going to be the low tax rate. And then we can take the next one. We'll say, well, we're going to use else if, because that means that, well, if it's not the one above it, then do this test. And that'll be if earnings are greater than the high tax rate. Oops, I cut off. And if that's true, then our tax rate, whoops, then our tax rate, come on, is going to be equal to the high tax rate. So now we got both ends done, which means the next thing is going to be in the middle, and that's our else. Else says the two above it are not true. So then, oops, almost copied that there. So that means that the tax rate is the mid-tax rate. So we'll go ahead and copy and paste that in. So we're kind of done, except if you remember that we also had a criteria that said that if it's in this decision here, is in this area, if it's true, and their disability, then their tax rate is 0. So really what we need to do is after this one, we're going to nest another decision, and that's going to be if disabled equals, whoops, equals yes. If that's true, then the tax rate is equal to disability tax rate. And disability tax rate is 0. And you can say, well, why didn't we just figure out the taxes rather than putting that 0 in there? Well, maybe later on they say disability tax rate is 1% just to get some money in. Then all we have to do is change this to 0.01 and everything works out the same. Right? And if it's not true, so else it's not true that they're disabled, well, then they do this tax rate here. So that doesn't change. So now we've went ahead and we've done every single one. So you see how simple that was. When you move from the bottom up, you'll always end up with the most efficient solution at the end. Now the only thing we're missing here is disabled. So disabled, and what I like to do is I like to put when I'm looking for specific answers, I always put yes/no or yes or no in parentheses to remind me, particularly when I'm going to be coding it later on, what values I should be testing for. So if I do yes or no like this, I know that I'm going to be looking for yes and no answers on the bottom. The only last thing we would do for assumptions is only one tax return at a time, only 3 rates, and oh, did we do dependence? Yeah, no, yes, did we do dependence? We did not do dependence. Yes, we did. Okay, never mind. All right. Oh, well, 2 is good enough. All right, that's it for this video. I'm not going to do the human algorithm for this because I've already done it pretty much. So I'm just going to be using this as the human algorithm. We move on to the next one, which is I'm going to take this and make a flowchart out of it.